What if Alberta walked away from Canada?
What would happen to our money, healthcare, and even passport?
Would Alberta collapse or finally take control of its own destiny?
This isn't just a political fantasy. Recent polls indicate that 1 in 3 Albertans would vote to leave Canada if a referendum were held today.
It's a scenario that Albertans are considering, especially ever since the last federal election.
So what would happen if Alberta separated from Canada?
Alberta has been at odds with Ottawa for decades, so much that Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith called that an attack on the province.
For Albertans, these attacks on our province by our own federal government have become unbearable.
So what exactly is Ottawa doing, or not doing, when it comes to Alberta?
Alberta produces about 80% of Canada's oil, yet, instead of being recognized as an economic engine, it often feels punished. The federal carbon tax hits Alberta harder than most, simply because the province is more energy-intensive by nature.
At the same time, Alberta wants to diversify where it sells its oil, not just to the US, but to global markets. And to do that, it needs pipelines that connect to ports on the west coast, through the US, and across eastern Canada. But nearly every major project proposed in the past decade has faced political and regulatory roadblocks, oftentimes from Ottawa, Indigenous communities, or provinces aligned with federal interests.
Meanwhile, Alberta is the largest net contributor to federal equalization, paying billions into a national system that provides funding to provinces like Quebec and Nova Scotia. But when oil prices crash and Alberta faces real economic hardship, it still doesn't qualify for a single dollar in return.
And it's not just about oil or equalization. There's a growing sense in Alberta that the province is pulling more than its weight, while Ottawa makes it harder to move forward. And that tension keeps widening the political and emotional divide.
At first glance, what Alberta is asking for sounds like common sense. Let's sell our oil to more than one customer. Let's build the infrastructure to sell more. Let's keep more of what we earn.
And these aren't radical demands. They sound like the basics of economic self-determination. And yet, time after time, Ottawa seems to stand in the way. It raises a real question. Why would any federal government resist something that could boost national prosperity?
From Ottawa's view, it's not just about Alberta. It's about the whole country. Canada made international commitments to reduce emissions under the Paris Agreement, and oil and gas make up over 25% of the country's total emissions. So when Ottawa imposes a carbon tax or delays fossil fuel projects, it sees it as part of the bigger climate strategy, one that has to balance Alberta's economy with global environmental pressure.
Now, the carbon tax topic has become a divisive subject for many in the last several years, probably primarily driven by Alberta. So, the federal government has recently at least acknowledged that the carbon tax is more harmful than helpful.
It's a very strong issue, as you know, here in Atlantic Canada. It's become very divisive.
Time will tell how words end up aligning with action.
But what about pipelines? To the federal government, those aren't just business decisions, they're political landmines. Many provinces like British Columbia and Quebec have strong anti-pipeline voter bases, not to mention Indigenous voices whose land will be affected the most. And let's be real, federal governments, no matter the party, are often hesitant to pick fights in regions where they need votes to stay in power.
When it comes to equalization, it's true. Alberta contributes a lot. But it's not because Ottawa takes the money directly from the provincial government. And we've dived deeper in this topic in another dedicated video, where we've also explored how to make the equalization system more fair for everyone. Looking at all these points from Ottawa's side, it's not about punishing Alberta. It's about managing national commitments, political survival, and redistribution based on ability to pay. Like a younger brother who happens to be the cash cow of the family and supporting the whole family. Obviously, at some point, the brother will feel it's unfair and resentment will grow.
And it grows so much that separation is now on the table.
Can't Alberta just declare independence by Monday and make everyone happy?
Not so fast. It all shall begin with a referendum. Under Canada's Clarity Act, Alberta would need to hold a clear referendum with a clear question and win with a clear majority. Like this: should Alberta become an independent country? Yes or no? Recent legislative changes in Alberta have made this process more accessible. Premier Danielle Smith announced that a citizen-led referendum on separation could be included on the 2026 ballot if a petition garners sufficient support. Specifically, the threshold for triggering such a referendum has been lowered, requiring signatures from just 10% of eligible voters within 120 days. Previously, the requirement was 20% within 90 days. But even a confident yes doesn't mean Alberta is free. Far from that.
That vote will unlock negotiations with Ottawa. They'd be long, messy, and historic. It wouldn't just be about planting a new flag, it would be about dividing the household, so to speak. And this isn't your average breakup. We're talking about sorting out who owes what on the mortgage, who keeps the 100-inch smart TV, and who still has to pick up the kids from school. Alberta and Ottawa will have to negotiate key things like division of national debt. If Alberta were to separate, it wouldn't walk away debt-free. Based on its population share, Alberta could be on the hook for about $140 billion of Canada's national debt, on top of its existing $86 billion provincial debt. That's a combined debt load of over $230 billion, or more than $50,000 per person. Independence comes with a price tag. If Alberta separates, it doesn't just walk away from Ottawa's influence, it also walks away from Ottawa's protection too. That means taking full control over law enforcement, the courts, and national defense. No more RCMP, no federal military presence. Alberta will need to build its own justice system, and it will now be in charge of defending its own borders and public safety. Citizenship and immigration will become one of the most immediate and personal questions. Would Albertans lose their Canadian passports? What would an Alberta passport even mean? And which other countries would accept it? Alberta would be starting from zero. It would need to establish its own citizenship rules, create a passport system, and negotiate visa agreements with other countries. And that's just the beginning. As a newly independent state, Alberta would have to build international recognition, open embassies, and forge trade and diplomatic relationships from scratch. All while proving itself as a stable, credible player on the global stage. Alberta holds only about 2.2% of Canada's freshwater supply. So water rights division will be a hot topic of discussion with Ottawa. The province's access to water is limited and increasingly stressed. Pipelines and pensions are two of the biggest flashpoints in Alberta's push for more autonomy. Alberta produces 80% of Canada's oil, but without direct access to tidewater, it relies on pipelines crossing provincial or international borders, all of which require federal or foreign approval. As a separate country, Alberta will face even tougher negotiations to move oil through BC or the US. Mr. Trump will be thrilled to work with the new country to work out a favorable deal, right?
We don't need them for anything. We don't need them for energy. We have more energy than they do. We don't need them for energy.
Then there's pensions. Alberta argues it's paying into the Canada Pension Plan, but its residents aren't using it enough. Well, that's because Albertans are younger and earn more, so they contribute more to the CPP than they actually receive in benefits. Premier Danielle Smith recently claimed that the province could be entitled to more than 50% of the current CPP assets. Ottawa and actuaries say the number is far lower, so the battle for pension funds between Ottawa and Alberta will not go easy. Finally, Indigenous treaties signed with Canada don't disappear if Alberta separates. These agreements, which cover most of Alberta, were signed between First Nations and the Crown, meaning the federal government of Canada. If Alberta were to become independent, it would have to negotiate entirely new agreements with Indigenous nations who have constitutionally protected rights under Canadian law.
Separatism isn't new to Canada. Quebec has held multiple referendums on independence, with the most recent in 1995, coming within a few thousand votes of breaking away from the country. But that still didn't happen, and the separatism movement has lost a lot of its flair in the recent years. While Quebec's push was rooted in language and cultural identity, Alberta's frustration is more material, it's economic, driven by a sense of imbalance, losing autonomy, and being ignored by Ottawa. Nevertheless, the emotional weight behind both movements feels strikingly familiar. If Albertans were to vote in favor of separation, they would have to embark on a long journey of negotiation, legal battles, and transition planning that could last 5 or even 10 years or more. For everyday Albertans, that could mean years of uncertainty over pensions, passports, healthcare coverage, and even the value of their savings.
Would Alberta create its own currency?
That's risky. When the Czech Republic and Slovakia split in 1993, they initially shared a currency, but it collapsed within just 6 weeks due to economic instability, forcing both countries to rush into creating separate currencies. This led to immediate depreciation of the Slovak koruna, capital flight, and inflation spikes, especially in Slovakia. In other words, a lot of economic uncertainty for citizens and businesses. Alberta is now Slovakia, but there are good lessons to learn from modern history separation events.
For Alberta, sticking with the Canadian dollar means less control, since it's Ottawa who will control interest rates. But what if Alberta adopted the US dollar?
Hold that thought, we'll get there in a minute.
Alberta receives $5 to $6 billion annually in federal health transfers. This money helps fund hospitals, pay doctors and nurses, support seniors' care, and keep emergency rooms running. That funding will disappear with the separation. The newly formed state will have to replace those funds with higher provincial taxes or premiums. Alberta could also adopt a more US healthcare system, dominated by private healthcare instead. Albertans currently have health coverage portability traveling to BC or Ontario, so in case of the separation, that will have to be renegotiated as well. Given how polarizing the topic of private and public healthcare has been for Canadians, it won't be a surprise if the public opinion on this will remain divided in Alberta.
Alberta's economy is strong on paper. Oil, gas, agriculture, technology, but independence has the potential to change everything. In the early days of separation, Alberta wouldn't just face political hurdles. The economic shock could be immediate and close to home. Investors hate uncertainty, and Alberta's economy is heavily reliant on energy and investment confidence. In just the first half of 2023 alone, Alberta attracted over $14 billion in capital investment. But if separation were on the table, a huge question mark will hover over future investment prospects. Companies might freeze hiring and pause expansion plans, at least until more certainty is achieved on economic subjects like trade or currency. Alberta exports roughly $150 billion in goods annually, and more than 90% of that goes to the United States, mostly in the form of oil, gas, and petrochemicals. Nearly all of it flows through infrastructure that crosses Canadian territory. As a new country, Alberta would no longer benefit from streamlined internal trade and transport systems, and every barrel of oil or rail car of grain could be subject to customs inspections, tariffs, or legal disputes. Trade agreements will vanish. Upon separation, Alberta would no longer be covered under Canada's trade agreements, including USMCA, CETA, and WTO membership. That means Alberta would lose preferential trade access to over 50 global markets and would have to negotiate new deals from scratch. These negotiations could take years, and until then, exporters could face higher tariffs, reduced competitiveness, and legal gray zones.
Alberta struggles negotiating its pipeline interests with Ottawa as part of Canada. Imagine what renegotiating pipelines as a foreign country might look like.
But let's imagine a world where a Canadian government cooperates and happily lets its child move out.
Alberta could build a low-tax, pro-business economy, a kind of Texas of the North. That would position Alberta ideologically closer to the American rule, unlocking privatization of sectors like healthcare, public transit, education, and so on. The US will likely be ecstatic about separation of Alberta. American investment in Alberta could increase if regulations were relaxed. By lowering income tax, reducing red tape, and attracting global capital, Alberta has everything that it takes to become a new energy player on the global scene. Alberta could become the Saudi Arabia of the North, capitalizing on its vast oil and gas reserves as a primary source of income. But all of that takes time, money, and trust, and political maturity, and any misstep could lead to a deep recession. And here's where it gets even more interesting.
Some in the Albertan separatist movement actually don't want independence. They want statehood.
So, could Alberta become the 51st state?
Technically, yes. Historically, Texas was an independent republic from 1836 until it joined the United States in 1845. And funny thing, today, it's one of a handful of the US states where political movements still occasionally float the idea of separation, often more as a political statement than a realistic plan. But the sentiment still lingers in some circles. Perhaps that's part of Trump's plan. If the US loses Texas, it can get Alberta instead.
But you can't just replace an old state with a new one.
No. In today's context, if Alberta were to decide to join the United States, well, first, it needs to finalize its separation from Canada. Then, the US Congress would need to approve it. This will be a tremendous crisis in the US-Canadian diplomacy. For Alberta to join the US, it would have to give up control over its resources, the same resources it sought to gain control over by separating from Canada. Then, the long process of adopting the American Labor Code, healthcare, and legal systems will begin.
Albertans will gain access to the US perks and benefits, but they will also lose many of the social guarantees that they're used to as part of Canada.
It's not impossible, but it's not simple. Everything is possible if you just believe in it, right?
In fact, yes. Alberta wouldn't be the first to try this. Catalonia held an unauthorized and constitutionally illegal referendum in 2017. Spain shut it down and leaders were jailed. Public support for separation has since dropped. It's worth noting, though, that unlike Spain, separation is declared constitutional in Canada. Scotland held a legal referendum in 2014 with the consent of the UK government. Voters chose to remain in the United Kingdom by a margin of 55 to 45%. Scotland is still legally part of the UK, despite an increased interest in separation post-Brexit. Our favorite Greenland is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. While it governs most of its internal affairs, and even withdrew from the European Economic Community in 1985, Denmark still handles its defense, foreign policy, and monetary system. Greenland has held independence referendums, but progress has been cautious. The reason is largely monetary. Greenland relies on an annual block grant from Denmark of about 4 billion Danish krone, which makes up more than half of its public budget. As a result, while independence remains a long-term aspiration, economic realities continue to slow the momentum. And let's not forget about Brexit. The UK voted to leave the European Union in 2016. Triggering years of complex negotiations and political upheaval. Only 4 years later, in December 2020, the separation finally took full effect and the UK officially left the European Union. The exit came at a steep cost. Market instability, new trade barriers, disrupted supply chains, and legal confusion. Main industries from finance to agriculture faced setbacks, and public opinion has since shifted, with a growing number of Britons expressing regret over the decision.
If you took part in any of these separation events and the aftermath, let us know in the comments below. We would like to know about your experience.
So we've seen what the separation looks like in the real world. Some movements have stalled, others pressed forward, and only a few came without a cost. But a bigger question is, who actually stands to gain from separation?
The most obvious winner from separation is Alberta's political and business elites. They get more power, more attention, and nation-building contracts. US investors and energy giants can seize the opportunity to strike a deal with a freshman country finding its footing and get cheap access to resources. Other separatist movements around the world will gain confidence as they look to Alberta as the potentially successful case study.
A longer-term vision for independent Alberta is building a stronger, energy-focused partnership with the US, assuming that the US keeps the drill baby drill mindset for the decades to come. Many of Alberta's businesses will thrive with fewer restrictions and more freedom to decide their fate.
Some might say that Canada will also win from Alberta separation. With strong energy advocate out, Ottawa gets to finally focus on renewable and green energy agenda and finally hit its climate targets.
But what about the regular people? We bear the highest risk, living in uncertainty for years if not a decade. But in the grand scheme of things, whether it's all worth it or not, time will tell.
Time will tell.
Alberta's frustrations with Canada are real. The feeling of being overlooked, overtaxed, and overregulated, that's not imagined. Alberta is like a talented business partner in a firm who keeps bringing in revenue, but every time they try to grow and spread its wings, they get clipped by Ottawa.
Is separation a true answer to the issues Alberta facing? Or is it a convenient card that Alberta can play to gain the treatment that they think they deserve from Ottawa?
Could Alberta survive alone?
Probably yes, with strong leadership and careful planning.
Would it be worth the cost?
That's the harder question, and for Albertans to decide. Hi guys, thank you for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic, especially if you're Albertan. We're not journalists, but we care about what's happening in the country we choose to call home. The situation that Alberta and Canada are facing with the equalization payments and the overall treatment is not just an interesting issue to us, but it's an issue that feels so obviously important. Yet, it's so blatantly ignored and unaddressed that we felt compelled to look into it and learn more about it from our research and your comments. So thank you for watching. This YouTube channel is fully self-funded, and it's your support that helps us make better videos every single time. So if you would like to support the work that we do, you can do so by joining as a YouTube member or checking out our merch shop. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.